This video doesn't follow the timeline of the trip and predates a few others, but there is a reason for that, which you will get to in a minute. It's now February and 3/4 of my stay in Garvold is behind me. Until a few days ago, I didn't even know that I had the choice to go to the tour to Wolfburn Whisky Distillery. Until 6 Italians turned up, our first official guests for the year. They had been here the year before as well, pleasant, loud and chatty. Turned out they had already arranged a visit in Thurso to Wolfburn Distillery. Well, if I could go with them, it would be wonderful. A whole day in nice company. Never mind that I didn't know Italian. Besides, they were in a 7-seater car. Perfect. Only there was one subtle point. I had to ask them somehow, and I'm not very good in that part. Luckily for me, I had Zach. More about him in the other videos. And so he did all the work for me, leaving me only the hard task of climbing into the front seat and enjoy the ride. And of course the group's goal was to see as much of the area as possible, which perfectly matched my aspiration. So we headed to Thurso along the most scenic route, stopping occasionally to enjoy the scenery and document it in photos. I was the only one with a video camera, and thanks to Italian gallantry, I was the only one in the front seat. So that's why this video is the first of Garvold instead of going in chronological order and being one of the last. That's my humble thanks to the Italians and Zach for giving me this experience. Thank you guys. The landscape here was becoming already familiar as we were approaching Bettyhill. As I soon found out, this was our lunch stop, and guess who we met outside the coffee shop? Our smiling Posty, of course. So while the others were arranging tables to fit us together, I secretly showed Giorgio the sign of the village Duat at Orkney Islands. Yeah, okay, now how to explain what's interesting about that sign? Well, I just told him to ask Google Translator about the meaning. Just love that photo. And my lunch was simple but extremely delicious. Quick stroll around and back to the car. The whiskey is waiting for us. We wanted to see Strathy Point Lighthouse on the way, but it turned out it's not accessible by a car, and there was no time for walking on foot. So we just waved it off and continued to Thurso, and the main goal of the trip, of course. Now, the whole time I was wondering how to make the secret plan Zach and I had happened. We wanted to get them a bottle of whiskey as a thanks. Luckily for me, the car needed a fuel and there was a shop just around the corner, so mission accomplished. And here we are, at Wolfburn Whisky Distillery. Now, I didn't ask permission for the video, so I didn't film on purpose while the lady was explaining about the facilities and production process. I'll leave it to the lady's stories now.
So the very first cask that was ever filled at Wolfburn, so it was filled in Scotland on what is a very significant date. It's called Burns Night because after a famous Scottish poet called Robert Burns, who was around in the 1700s. So the Scots are very proud of our history and our heritage. So Robert Burns wrote a lot of really good poetry. His birthday was the 25th of January, and the Scots celebrate his birthday every year on that day. So the Scots, to celebrate Burns' birthday, they come together and eat haggis and have lots of whiskey drinking and lots of traditional reciting of his poetry, and also traditional music and dancing. Yeah, because we want them for maturing our whiskey. So the spirit that goes into the casks is clear in colour, and it has a chemical reaction with the oak, with the wood, which contains things called tannins and vanillins. So also what affects the colour and flavour of the whiskey is what has been in the cask before. So for example, whiskey matured in a bourbon cask is going to taste and look different from whiskey that's been matured, for example, in a sherry cask.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Scotch whiskey's got to be made and matured in Scotland in oak casks for a minimum of 3 years and 1 day before it can be called Scotch whiskey. Yeah. If it was just a standard tour, we had 4 whiskies for people to taste, but the 10-year-old is part of it, so there are 5. But you guys are on a premium tour.
Yeah.
The glasses are included in the tour.
Oh, thank you.
So you get to keep your glass.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you.
And I have a glass too. At the time of posting the video, it is still intact on the edge of Ireland. I hope it survives to Bulgaria. And I, someone who hadn't even tried whiskey until a month ago, had the privilege to taste all of those. It was an experience. I've deliberately kept the lady's explanation for each whiskey we tried.
Yeah, Aurora is the first one. Yeah, so it's a mix. Aurora's a mix of sherry casks
Very small.
and bourbon casks marrying the table. Other than the 10-year-old, which is just called the 10-year-old because the whiskey's 10 years old. The other whiskey names reflect either our history or our landscape. So Aurora is called after the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights. So the whiskey should smell quite fruity, it should smell quite melody. And then when you drink it, it's got a little bit of spice at the back.
Little bit?
Quite a long bit. Quite a bit. Right, the second one that I'm going to pour, it's called the Northland.
Northland.
Yeah. So this whiskey has been matured in these small bourbon casks, but the casks were previously used for maturing a heavily peated whiskey in the Western Isles in Scotland. So this whiskey is not peated, but it's picked up a trace of smoke from what was in the cask before, from the peated whiskey that was in the cask before. Northland was actually the first whiskey bottled and sold by Wolfburn in 2016, and even when it was only 3 years old, it was winning awards for being a really good young whiskey. But the name, so in this area we have a lot of Viking history. When the Vikings came here, they referred to this area as the Northland, so that's where the name comes from.
It's not that spicy like the first one.
Yeah, it's very different from the Aurora. Yeah. Could you smell the smoke? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not a peated whiskey drinker, so I can smell the smoke like straight away. Now, the next one that I'm going to pour is the Langskip. It is a cask strength whiskey, so the others are 46%. This one is 58%. And Langskip, it actually means Viking longship. So there's a little picture of a Viking boat here on the front of the bottle. Water.
I don't want water.
So notice this 1821, which is obviously not when this distillery was built, but the reason we've got that, so 200 years ago, there was an old farm distillery further up the Wolfburn from here, and it was called Wolfburn Farm Distillery because it used the water also from the Wolfburn. So the man that started that distillery was a local man from Thurso called William Smith, and he served in the British Army, and he was in Africa in the early 1800s whilst the Napoleonic Wars were going on. So when the wars finished, William Smith, that was in 1815, he came back to Thurso, and a few years later, in 1821, using the money that he'd earned from being in the army, he started Wolfburn Farm Distillery. He invested a lot of money into it, and it quickly became the biggest distillery in this area, and one of the biggest in the Highlands. And we know from an old tax record from 1826 that year the old distillery produced 28,000 gallons of Thurso, which is around 125,000 litres, which is what we're producing today. And you know, the sort of geography and the population of these places. So this town called Thurso, which is in this area called Caithness, and the other town called Wick, the population of both of these towns at the moment stands at around 8,000 people per town. But back in the 1840s, I think it would have been quite a bit less. But this area called Caithness was managing to drink its way through 5,000 bottles of whisky per week.
Per week. Wow.
William Smith, so he lived until 1845, and when he died, the distillery was then run by one of his family. But the family member decided to emigrate away from Scotland around 1860. So the distillery closed and the mash tun and the 2 stills were sold at auction, and so that was the end of Wolfburn Farm Distillery. There was a farm up there as well called Wolfburn Farm, and in time it stopped operating. So nowadays if you walk up there's nothing left of the buildings other than you can see the flagstones in the ground where the buildings used to be. Now, when our founders were looking for somewhere to build their distillery, they thought it might be quite clever to build it somewhere where there'd been an old distillery before. So what they've done, by building near to the site of that old distillery and using the same water, they've been allowed to reawaken the Wolfburn Distillery name. So they've been allowed to sort of bring that all back to life. So next one is our 10-year-old. So this comes from spirit that's been matured for 10 years in those big casks like cask 1, 2, 3, 4. You should smell, taste figs and raisins from this one. It's a bit sweet because it's been the whole 10 years in the sherry cask. It's the same spirit that's gone into the casks for these 4 whisky. It's the casks that made the different colours and flavours. Now this one is called Morven, and it is called after the highest hill in Caithness, but the hill is called Mount Morven. So this is actually a picture of Mount Morven, but it's partly obscured by the bottle. So it's 80% from the rum casks and 20% from the bourbon casks.
What is the difference between?
Blend and single malt.
Yes.
So single malt whiskies have to be made using barley, and all of the casks have had to come from the same distillery. So like some of these whiskies are 2 casks married together, but they've all come from Wolfburn because we just do our own thing. Blended whiskies come from casks that have come from different distilleries, and then they've been blended, mixed together. See this bottle here? This is called the 1821, and this was a special bottle in 2021, and it was released to mark 200 years since the old distillery was founded. So the bottle is called after the year Wolfburn Farm Distillery was founded, and there were 1,821 bottles, so 1,821 of the 1821 were ever produced, and this is one of them. So it's bourbon casks, but they have a small amount of cask 1 in this bottle too. See the two little casks on the bottle, the 2 little stills on the bottle, I should say. Now this blue and white, this is actually the Caithness flag, so the flag for this area is blue and white, so that's what that is.
It's not Ukrainian.
No, it's not Ukrainian. So we've got the stills, we've got the flag, and then these little elephants. When William Smith was in Africa, he was with a regiment from Scotland who were called the 78th Highland Regiment on foot. Do you like this? It's a 16th century etching by a man from Switzerland who was called Conrad Gessner. And he was a zoologist and linguist, and he did a writing about the history of four-footed beasts and serpents, which was about creatures in Viking times and mythical creatures. So this is a mythical creature. It's meant to be a sea wolf, which was a supernatural cousin of the land wolf. It was able to walk on land and sea, and it lived near the coast. And if you ever saw one, it was meant to bring you really good luck. So one of our founders is very interested in Viking history, and he found this old etching and thought it would be perfect for Wolfburn's branding. So Wolfburn now own the world rights to that image, so you shouldn't see it anywhere other than on our marketing. This one is a bottle that was released last year. It's called the Cask Strength 2023. So it's like the Aurora. It's bourbon casks and sherry casks married together, 50% from each. But the difference, this bottle is 56.9%, 458. And it is a mix of lightly peated bourbon casks and PX, Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. So PX, do you guys know what that is? So it's sweet sherry casks.
Wow, what an exceptional day. Thank you guys one more time.